Good morning to my American friends. Happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate. To my American friends, happy Thursday. Like I said, we're going out for Thanksgiving. We're not going until like mid-afternoon, so I'm just having kind of a lazy morning, which is exactly what I need. And I was catching up on some of the things in the case. If you need an excuse to get away from whatever family nightmare you're in, oh my God, there's a big update in the case. I have to go talk to my lawyer about it. This video is for you. Also, just because I need you guys to know the other side of living with a Frank. He was so sweet. We got him home. He was like so excited to see us, kissing us, whatever. And then last night, we're getting ready for bed. So excited to be in our bed. Put him up in the bed, whatever. He walks right over to my husband's side of the bed and pees. Huge puddle. Of course, we had to then clean it up and wash the sheets and all that. But do not be fooled by the sweet face. The dog is savage. When he is mad, he will tell you with his bladder. So, I'm very glad to be back with him, but I hope that's the end of his temper tantrum for us leaving him for 4 days. So I was looking at the most recent stuff, including like the order from the hearing and the unsealings and stuff. And I think it's important to sort of frame that this is kind of a weird part of the case, right? When you're in discovery, the rules are pretty clear. When you're getting ready for trial, the rules are pretty clear because you have these deadlines coming up and you have these very obvious interests of what everybody's focused on. But we're in between part where we have active dispositive motions on the table that have been filed. The parties are also, we don't think about it because we're following all this other stuff. They are actively doing expert discovery right now. So they are taking expert depositions, they are reading expert reports, they are filing rebuttal reports. So all of these things are happening. So it's sort of this strange middle ground of the judge knowing, like, I am not going to grant a dispositive motion based on evidence that the public hasn't seen, right? However, we are not yet at the point of trial where it's like, you guys better settle this if you don't want it to come out, because in trial, everything's coming out. So they're in this sort of liminal space in between, which is why I think you're seeing some of this piecemeal unsealing. Now, when it comes to the Jed Wallace stuff, this I think is, Jed is in kind of a tough place because the only real, so the judge has said, like, the stuff about your other clients, like, that's, people don't need to know who your other clients are, but the type of work you have done for other clients is fair game because, as the judge said in the beginning, we have the right to know, like, to see if we can see those patterns with regard to Lively. And, you know, in a case where you were talking about somebody's business practices, what you would normally want to do is say, well, that's a trade secret. That's proprietary business information. That's how I do my work. If you let it out there in the public, then all of my competitors are going to know how I do my work. But Wallace can't really do that because he doesn't want to admit that's what he does. So he's sort of between a rock and a hard place, right? He can't be like, well, that's a trade secret. That's how I smear people. That's how I manipulate the internet, because then he has to admit that he does that. So he's in this kind of weird spot. And I guess they've just decided that they're going to have to deal if this stuff comes out. Now, I still do think, as I said the other day, that what Lively is hoping for the PR side of this is that if people see how it's been done to other people, they can then make the corollary that's what was done to her. I'm not sure the evidence is there for that, but we haven't seen it yet. And as I said many months ago, I still think that she is fucking over the whole celebrity PR machine by putting out all this stuff is done. That's her choice. If she feels like that's the best way to prove her case, she can do that. But I imagine there are a lot of people in Hollywood who are not very happy about it. So when it comes to the order on the additional stuff from Katie Case, he's sticking to the same analysis he's done all along. Is there good cause? Did they exercise due diligence or did they not? He's saying no, they didn't. But I also think he's sending a message here of, look, look at this line up here that says, blah, blah, blah. They argue the wayfarer parties will not be prejudiced by an amendment to the scheduling order because the court hasn't ruled on summary judgment. But that does not mean the parties are free to continue to issue pretrial fact subpoenas up until the motion for summary judgment. So he's saying, like, guys, we got to stop with this. I know I have summary judgment motions on the table, and I know you have no idea when I'm going to rule on them, but we're not going to keep doing this. And then he goes on down here to say, like, please remember, a scheduling order is a court order. And the court has its own interest in making sure that its orders are followed. So we're not just going to keep doing this. I think this gave him an opportunity to be like, stop it already with the pushing of the schedule. Now, I will say, I said from the very beginning, every deadline in cases this big and this complicated gets moved. The idea that they still think they can go to trial in March is bananas. So I expected this to move, right? Like in a regular non-PR case, the trial would have already been moved. People would have been like, we can't possibly do this. Let's bump the trial till fall. But I think because both parties have positioned themselves as we want to go to trial as soon as possible, they can't move it. So it's not surprising at all that these deadlines keep getting moved. This happens all the time in cases smaller than this. But I do think he's saying, like, listen, guys, I've got the motions. I'm going to deal with the motions, but I'm not going to keep dealing with discovery bullshit. So stop asking me. And then he basically says here, like, I understand you have, and he goes back and forth about whether they were on notice of it at Nathan's deposition, yada. But, you know, if the wayfarer parties failed to produce documents, then they should have filed a motion to compel. I think he's like, listen, guys, again, we're past this. We're not going to start doing this now in late November, early December. If people didn't turn over the stuff they were supposed to before the end of discovery months ago, you should have told me. But I don't see anything extraordinary here. And then he gets a little spicy down here, where he talks about we had discovery deadlines and then Melissa Nathan, whether they were on notice and yada. And he says, although there's nothing here that would prohibit the Jones parties from asking Case to voluntarily share, because they claim that she agreed to do it. What the Jones parties cannot do is issue an untimely subpoena without court permission and then ask the court to enforce that subpoena without good cause. He's like, guys, no. It's so funny, like, reading these orders, because all judges are different. Some judges will write you like a long thing like this, because remember that discovery things are not appealable, at least not immediately appealable. So a lot of times judges don't write orders this long, even in federal court. They're just like, blah, 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 no good cause shown, denied. So, you know, we do get the reasoning. In state court, they would literally just write an order that was like, the motion is denied. And then you would go to a hearing and they would scream at you and be like, what were you thinking? Absolutely not. You're embarrassing yourself. Please leave. So I know that people feel like sometimes this judge can be a little tough. I promise you this is incredibly mild. And then he does this thing here where he gives them, listen, you're arguing about this as a credibility issue. There is a mechanism under which right before trial, if you're like, we think this is out there and we're going to need it to deal with impeachment and credibility at trial, just for cross-examination purposes, not for purposes of proving our case, there is a mechanism for that. We're not there yet. But don't forget that this exists. He's done this before. Hey guys, if you get to that point in the road, remember that this exists, which is also him going above and beyond. He doesn't have to tell them that. These are people at Quinn Emanuel. They know how to practice law. But again, he's like, guys, we're not going to deal with this now. We're going to deal with this down the road. So, you know, I think he, again, think of him what you will. He goes out of his way to tell us what the reasoning is, and he does not have to. There's no requirement that judges write orders this long. And oftentimes they don't. So I think we're getting an idea that he's like, please just stop already with the discovery stuff. Let me rule on these dispositive motions and figure out whether I need to deal with the spoliation sanctions and all these sanctions motions. And then let's see where we are. That's how I read it.